Peak stasis.
I know something that you don't. I am not left-handed. This is what the character Inigo Montoya says halfway through a sword duel against his opponent in the 80s movie The Princess Bride. This line is particularly interesting because in this intense sword fight, at this moment, Inigo is actually being overpowered by his opponent, the Man in Black, or the Bandit, as I'll be calling him. Inigo has been training practically his whole life in sword training for one purpose: to kill the six-fingered man who killed his father. This isn't the six-fingered man, by the way. He's just a guy who had been following Inigo and his band of mercenaries to sabotage their mission, as the mercenaries suspected. This is precisely why Inigo and the bandit are fighting, so Inigo can ward off the pursuer. Well, that's what the mercenaries said anyway. The real reason Inigo wanted to fight is a bit different. He wanted to just have an honorable duel. But before meeting the bandit, he vowed to fight the bandit with his left hand as a challenge to himself, and so the fight wasn't too short. Fast forward to when he says the line,
I am not left-handed.
he switches his sword to his right hand and begins to overpower the bandit. The bandit is pushed back, disadvantaged by the terrain while walking backward until he's cornered. The bandit admits Inigo's proficiency and praises it, but mirrors Inigo's line back to him.
I'm not left-handed either.
The bandit had been fighting left-handed this whole time and just now switched to his right. Now the tides have turned. The bandit is a proficient swordsman, possibly more so than Inigo, and pushes Inigo back. They each do a gymnastics jump for some reason, but the bandit does it much more gracefully. The graceful swings of their swords, the different acts of the fight, they're all incredible. Is it the greatest sword duel ever? Well, probably not. But why? It's definitely one of my favorites, a certified peak stasis, if you will. Yes, I'm gonna make my channel name a word now, but I mean, there are probably other better fights out there, and this fight doesn't seem enough to be the greatest fight ever. Maybe it's the stakes. The Princess Bride doesn't take itself awfully seriously after all. It's a parody of fairy tale-like stories, and this fight is no exception. The swords wobble when moved quick enough, the ground here is clearly padded and not solid, and this conveniently placed gymnastics bar is a bit out of place. But this movie still takes itself seriously enough so that it isn't overly ironic. The bandit here is actually a character named Wesley, who set out on hunting down the mercenaries that Inigo accompanied to save the princess that the mercenaries had kidnapped, which was his childhood love from many years before. It's not an original backstory, but the movie knows that and expects you to know it too. It's a family fun movie, as many call it. We know this duel won't turn into a bloody mess, and we know these characters probably won't die. But let's just see what it does right. It isn't entirely original, but that's fine. It's sort of a spectacle. It's long, interesting, has some cool one-liners, namely the whole left-handed thing, and obviously it has some awesome choreography. We know that if a duel must be good, it must be interesting in a way similar to this fight. So if this isn't the greatest sword duel ever, then what is? How do other sword fights do what this one does but better? And what else does it do? What duels in fiction have a better chance than this fight at being the best?
Follow me then.
You probably already know what this duel is, but if you don't, or just want to hear it anyway, this is Anakin Skywalker versus Obi-Wan Kenobi. Since Star Wars' inception in the 70s, we've known of Obi-Wan and Anakin's rivalry. Hearing about it in the original Star Wars, then learning that Darth Vader is Luke's father, makes their epic rivalry feel like the stuff of legend. Naturally, when Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith came to theater, many decades after the first movie came out, with heavy advertising of the epic duel between these two, fans were beyond excited. The first Star Wars film featured lightsabers, but they weren't used in such a spectacular way as this. The fights in A New Hope were decent, and as the movies released, the lightsaber duels became increasingly more interesting. When the prequels released, they became a bit more focused on better cinematography, better choreography, obviously because of better technology, but overall more spectacle and better fights. Though there was a large disappointment among the fans against the prequel movies, the clear increase in quality for the fights was apparent, and this all led up to the third installment, or sixth total installment. The gargantuan beast of a fight that this was spanned 12 minutes, beginning in the final section of the movie where Anakin Skywalker has fully turned to the dark side, becoming Darth Vader. Anakin has performed the greatest betrayal in the entire series, and one of the biggest, or at least one of the most well-known, in fiction entirely. They are on the Sith planet, or evil planet, I guess, Mustafar, a hell-like wasteland of nothing but fire. I like to think of this fight as a video game boss with multiple phases, but each phase correlates not to different moves from either of the two, but rather the dynamic environment. The beginning takes place fighting along and inside structures of Mustafar, as well as on platforms. They jump around and duel on increasingly more dangerous platforms. One of these platforms breaks and begins falling to the blistering flow of lava below them. They maneuver around the platform, adjusting themselves as it falls, continuing the fight. Then they transfer to another phase of the fight where they ride floating platforms. Here we can even see what would be a cutscene with dialogue.
From my point of view, the Jedi are evil!
I promise I won't talk about this dialogue for too long, but it's just a bit weird and unnatural. It's a little less impactful as a result. Eventually, Obi-Wan jumps off the platform and says the famous line,
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground!
and Anakin jumps. So, in comparison to Inigo versus Wesley, this fight is definitely more spectacular. It takes place with lava everywhere, the environment changes how they battle, the fight is so long. So, is this the greatest duel in fiction? Or a good contender? Well, definitely one of the most iconic, but if you can't tell by my tone, I do have a few problems with it. First of all, some praise. Props to the actors. It took months of training, apparently 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for around 2 months, and pretty much all the fighting was done by the actors, Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor. It is also the longest lightsaber duel to date by a lot, but in my opinion, it almost overstays its welcome. I enjoy it a lot, and it's meant to be a spectacle, but it is very long. And the dialogue is... Anyway, this fight says a lot about how to make a great and memorable duel. The first thing it does right is the build-up. While not perfect on its own, the movie builds up the climax quite well. What really sets it apart is the fact that it had been building up for decades, which definitely gives it a huge advantage. The spectacle of the fight is something I keep mentioning, so I'll better explain it here. There's a lot of lightsaber swinging, but it's dynamic. There's different moves we haven't seen before, moves that we have seen before, but maybe not in this context. Then there's a dynamic environment that I mentioned earlier, forcing them to shift to different areas and create new settings to swing their lightsabers. And also, a lava planet was a perfect choice for this. So, it looks cool, but what else does it have going for it? Well, it has a lot of emotional weight. Obi-Wan is fighting his apprentice, someone who was like his own kid. Anakin is strongly misguided and angry. He's been manipulated and is tragic. Though there's a lot of sword swinging, a lot of it has a weight behind it. And of course, when Obi-Wan has to kill Anakin, he yells and screams at him, devastated, but also feels guilt himself. Was it his fault in some way? Did he not raise him properly? Did he not train him properly? Well, whether that was true or not, one thing remains certain. He was leaving his apprentice to die. Obi-Wan did not know Anakin would be rescued. He was just left there. So from it, we can update our criteria. A fight should have a lot of spectacle and have emotional weight behind it. It should also be creative, evident in The Princess Bride with the one-liner, and in this with a dynamic environment. And to kind of accomplish this, fights kind of have to be a certain length to achieve it. Star Wars shows some spectacle and emotional weight, but Dune adds something even more powerful. A strong and clear purpose. Dune is a huge can of worms, pun intended, and I'm not going to fully deconstruct the entire story, which would kind of be necessary to fully understand this scene, but I'll give a brief rundown. This scene is the ultimate climax of Dune Part 2, or of the book. It feels sacred. It would determine who would be able to hold power over Arrakis, the planet that having a monopoly over would guarantee a monopoly over the universe itself. A rare resource called spice, only found on the desert planet Arrakis, was the reason for this. It had many uses, but one of its main uses was to gain prescience, visions of the future. Thade Rotha, this guy here, is the heir to the House Harkonnen, which is the main antagonistic force in Dune. At least, the first book. Thade is a hot-headed gladiator who would stop at nothing to win fights, a man with no honor, or at least an obscured look on it. He was an intelligent man, but susceptible to being manipulated. Paul Atreides, our protagonist, is a messianic figure to the people of Arrakis, the Fremen, and originates from the House Atreides. These two are deeply interwoven. Paul's mother is part of a shadowy religious group called the Bene Gesserit, a group of females who can control their biology and are part of a huge breeding scheme in hopes to eventually breed the Kwisatz Haderach, or in other words, a person with complete and total control over their body and mind, as well as someone who can obtain perfect prescience or perfect vision of the future. This Kwisatz Haderach would be a super being, someone who could guide the future within the control of the Bene Gesserit. This breeding program originally intended for Paul to be a girl and to breed with Feyd-Rautha, ending their long feud and giving birth to the Kwisatz Haderach. But Paul, who is a boy in case you can't tell, ends up becoming the Kwisatz Haderach earlier than the Bene Gesserit intended. If you're confused, I definitely get it, but the main takeaway here is that Paul's mother was supposed to bear a girl, which is something that she was able to control, and this girl was supposed to breed with Feyd. Breeding seems like a really weird word to use, but anyway. This was supposed to be something to put a long rest of the Harkonnen and Atreides rivalry and breed the superhuman, but instead, Paul is the superhuman and wants to fight Feyd to the death. Gurney, another character, offers to step in for Paul and fight for him, but Paul refuses. This is what makes this fight scene stand out to me personally. It's not just so that Paul can have his hero moment. Keep in mind, Paul has perfect prescience. Seeing the future isn't as linear as other stories make it out to be in Dune, but he can still tell somewhat how this fight will end. He wants to prove one last time to the Fremen that he really is the Messiah. The Fremen watch the two fight like an audience, but not for entertainment. Paul deliberately risks his own life, effectively sacrificing himself like a Messiah would, rendering himself vulnerable to prove his devotion to what he preaches. The fight has no music, at least not while they're actively fighting, but it's super intense. Dune isn't entirely easily predictable either, so the stakes are especially high. We know Paul will likely live, but seeing him suddenly lose control and getting stabbed by a poisonous knife fractures this sort of. Now, it's uncertain who will win, and the fate of the universe revolves around this fight. Will the native Fremen of Arrakis win, or will the Harkonnen win? Paul pulls through and is able to kill Feyd in front of all of his Fremen. After a brief moment of silence, they all yell,
Listen, Agaib!
which is what they call the Messiah in their language, or literally meaning voice of the outer world. So this fight adds something really important to the criteria. This fight was for Paul to become vulnerable and sacrifice himself, showing the Fremen his devotion. Fight scenes should have a clear point, and this is a perfect example. Either outcome of the fight would have drastically been different from each other. There was a point to kill Feyd, so Paul would remain in control, and the aforementioned approval of the Fremen. I don't really know how to transition this part, so let's just briefly switch mediums to video games. My favorite final boss out of any video game mechanically is the final boss of Sekiro. Sekiro's story is something I'm conflicted about, though I will admit, the bosses in this game are unquestionably some of the best in the Soulsborne series. Sword Saint Ishin is the final boss for 3 out of 4 endings in Sekiro, and the one that you're most likely to face. He throws everything he's got at you, everything you've learned, deflecting timings, doing special moves like the Mikiri counters, deflecting bullets, and my favorite, or the coolest looking, the lightning reversal. He is the ultimate test of everything. Each move in each phase demands pure focus and an entirely disciplined attitude. He's the golden standard for what Sekiro is all about, the epitome of all the game tried to be, and in my opinion it perfects that. If you haven't learned all the game's mechanics to an adequate or good level, this fight will prove exceedingly challenging, and it's sort of like a final roadblock. If you can't beat Sword Saint Ishin, then you haven't learned all that Sekiro has to offer. This concept can be applied outside of video games, which is why I brought it up. Personally, I believe a fight should be a testament to what the story is trying to say, or at least one aspect or part. Not all fights are final fights, and not all of them have to wrap up a story's themes, but they should be symbolic in a way. This is something I believe Anakin vs. Obi-Wan is sort of missing. It is symbolic, but it almost isn't symbolic enough, if that makes sense. The cool moves that they do are cool, but a lot of the time they don't serve any purpose other than for spectacle. So let's review our criteria real quick. A fight should be original or creative, spectacular, climactic, and symbolic. It should also respect what it's trying to say and not be purely spectacle, but spectacle is an important part. Without the emotional weight of Obi-Wan and Anakin, their fight wouldn't feel as impactful. But with the emotional weight and spectacle, it makes for an insane and intense battle. Anyway, that's it for... Wait. Oh, no, I forgot one example. Sorry, guys. This is an interesting one. So, this final example is possibly my favorite on the list, so I'll hype it up a lot. Guts versus Griffith. A boy born from his mother's corpse, raised by a mercenary who he would one day kill, walks lonesome in Midland, a kingdom locked in a century-long conflict. The lands were war-torn and grim. Acts of violence were not events but rather a routine. The boy, Guts, is now a mercenary on his own, living by his own accord, carrying a sword too big for himself. He hadn't much of a purpose, though it was unlikely that he had ever put much thought into what his purpose might be. The boy slew a man larger than most with his sword, a nameless steel that was feared by men. Silent eyes watched from afar. One pair of eyes remained unblinking. A face bereft of flaws, and hair that reflected the pale sunlight with a sacred sheen. Griffith. He sent riders to abduct Guts so that he may join their mercenary band, the glorious Band of the Hawk. Guts did not yield. He retained his composure, fighting off the mercenaries as they attacked him later that day. Griffith came down. Prepared to fight, he spoke of terms. If Guts won the battle, he would keep his freedom. If Griffith won, Guts would belong to the Hawks, and to Griffith. They clash swords, but in a sequence of odd moves, Griffith wins the fight, and Guts is, against his will, recruited to the Band of the Hawk. Guts and Griffith become friends, giving Guts a purpose. Griffith relishes in Guts' presence. His ego thrives knowing that Guts was his.
You belong to me, Guts.
But there was more to it. Griffith viewed someone who had a dream apart from his own as a true friend. Most of his mercenaries leached off of his dreams and goals, but he viewed Guts in a different way. This duel is symbolic. Guts fights for his own freedom from authority, and Griffith fights so that Guts may remain in his grasp. It tells us about each of these characters, but this wasn't the duel I was going to talk about. Cold hung in the air on a winter day. After months of long contemplation, Guts decides he wants to leave the Band of the Hawk. Though Griffith viewed Guts as someone with his own dream, Guts did not feel this way about himself. He felt as though if the Band of the Hawk were a bonfire, and each member contributed firewood to it, he was simply a passerby, destined to leave and find his own purpose elsewhere. His purpose in life did not lie here. He did not know where it did lie, but that was a journey he wanted to pursue. The members are all opposed to his leave. He was a fearsome and wicked warrior, often trivializing dangerous encounters and ensuring the victory for the Hawks. None were more opposed than Griffith. Their swords faced each other as the sun slowly rose behind the mountains. A tree stood behind Guts, where the other Hawks watched in anticipation. Guts was not allowed to leave. He belonged to Griffith. It was determined after their duel. But to abide by a fair law, Griffith allowed Guts to leave if he won another duel. Griffith analyzes the situation carefully. He struggles to figure out a way to duel Guts without killing him, but then suggests to himself that if Guts wishes to leave, then his life should not matter anymore. Griffith stood in trembling sanctity, the once untouchable Hawk now shivering at the thought of losing. Guts' attitude rendered him dead in Griffith's mind, or so Griffith told himself just then. A lonely wind intruded with cold. Guts' face was not filled with anger. It was hideously neutral, unapologetically bearing a calm that resembled his certainty with his decision, a determination so strong that even someone whom he had ridden alongside for years in battle was a mere obstacle in his path. His look was sharply cold, a look that would cut away any warm thing, even someone as unshakable as Griffith. A lump of snow fell off the tree behind Guts, and Griffith lunged forward. An epic and emotional battle was sure to ensue. Griffith's sword broke. Guts stops his sword just above Griffith's shoulder as a blast of air levels the snow around them, compensating for Guts' titanic blade suddenly stopping. Guts puts his sword on his back and leaves, bidding farewell without even looking back. So, our previous criteria of fights being like a dance, a spectacular choreography, is kind of shattered here, because this is still considered a fight scene, or a duel. A lot of historic duels lasted about this long, over in 1 or 2 moves, maybe more if they were lucky, so surely it can be considered a duel. But now it sort of seems like I don't even know what a fight scene is. A fight scene should be spectacular and cool and intricate and emotional and symbolic, but it can be all of these things while being short. While being so short that it's over, in universe time, less than a second. In some ways, these traits are seen better when the fight is short. So after writing this video, here's what I think. To critique a fight, you need to understand what exactly it's doing. Critiquing the length of the Obi-Wan versus Anakin fight is unjust considering a lot of it is just for intention of being cool and being climactic. But if a fight is trying to advance a story or be a turning point, here's what it should be in my opinion. Firstly, and most importantly, concise. A fight should never be too long unless part of the point is to be entertaining, or to be long, I guess. Next, following our early criteria, it should be symbolic of something. Either an ultimate scene for a character or an advancement in the story. It should have a clear purpose. Another thing from the early criteria is that it should be spectacular. But here's where the criteria gets a bit muddy. Spectacular could really mean many things here. It could be flashy and epic, like Sword Saint Ishin. It could be expertly cinematic, like Guts vs. Griffith. It could feature multiple acts, like Obi-Wan vs. Anakin or Inigo vs. Wesley. The term spectacle can really be stretched out here, encompassing many different definitions and characteristics. But the point of spectacle, in my opinion, is the presentation of the fight. How the fight should feel, and how does it feel? Is the final boss of Dark Souls 1, for example, underwhelming? Or is it fitting considering the final boss is a husk of his previous self? Violence is something deeply rooted within humans. Throughout human history, we have been violent. Nowadays, violence is different. It's more organized and seems like there's less of it, but where there is, there's unfortunately a lot of it. It's more concentrated. The kind of warfare that happens today is also very different. Sword fighting in war sounds cooler than modern warfare, which is probably the reason why lightsabers were invented, but in reality, fighting with a sword is probably just as miserable, if not more, than fighting war today. Fights should represent a concentrated and deliberate sense of obligation to attack the precious human body. Considering a lot of people today are unfamiliar with ultraviolence, thankfully, or at least more so now than in history, fighting is often used to prove a point. Show a violence that you are not used to in attempt to convey something. Show a spectacle that is so beyond what you think you would see in real life. This is the point of a duel in my eyes. Some fights in movies definitely seem more personal, but they are rarely meant to encourage you to inflict violence, and instead used to show you, who may be unfamiliar with violence, a look into the implications of violence and what it means, and its presentation can make or break this. If it's trying to be cool, it'll have flashy colors. If it's trying to be deep, it will have some kind of concrete reason for existing, or invigorate some other emotion within you with its imagery or cinematography. Even after thinking, I'll be honest, I'm still kind of confused about what makes a duel good, and I don't think this explanation is necessarily a concrete representation of what I think exactly. If you guys want to rebut any of my points, feel free to go wild in the comments. I'll take hate comments, unless they're needlessly or unnecessarily hateful. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please consider checking out my other content, and if you enjoy it, consider subscribing. Thank you all, and I'll see you in the next Peak Stasis video.